We don't play all music, only good music. We're Damn Radio.
Alrighty then. Hello, good evening, and welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is Damn Radio, and you are listening to International Flavor, where the truth just tastes better. Isn't that right? Welcome you to join us on the live stream, which is taking place right now at internationalflavor.com. If you log in and you become a member, you will certainly be able to get alerts when they come up. Now, what I do with this show is typically it is live. I am live on damnradio.com /live if you wish to continue to listen.
I tell you what, people, I really am live, and I think I screwed that up somehow. So apparently we have something in the Dragon that's not an empty space holder, JR, and I don't know how to get rid of it, and I dragged over the wrong one. So it started, and then I had to figure out what the hell I was doing. Well, welcome to the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. And since all I did on that little recording from a prior show, which we'll have to figure out how to get rid of so I don't do that again, so I've already told you how you can get a hold of me. You can go to internationalflavor.com and get all of my back stuff. You can go to damnradio.com /live and listen to me live 9 p.m. to 10:30 every single night from Sunday through Thursday. And I enjoy doing it, so I'm going to keep on doing it. There's a lot of news going on, a lot of interesting stuff, and how I kind of pick topics, especially for the deep dive. And tonight's a 2-hour program. It's a deep dive little sort of thing. And if you feel the urge, you can call in if you want to. But I got plenty of content tonight. If you do, that's completely fine. 573-746-8020. But I got pretty interested in a couple of things here. And it's this one, JR, the red one. That's the one you got to get rid of. And I'm watching JR do his thing. I love it. But anyway, the fact is that I usually listen to my deep dive topics. I try to pick them up from Russian topics. You know, everybody knows that I listen to quite a bit of Russian TV news, Russian, Vkontakte. I watch some Smotrim, and I watch Vladimir Solovyov fairly regularly. I haven't seen him in a little bit, but I like to watch the live or even recorded, but they're long play. They're like a long, and they are like 2-hour longs briefings of Maria Zakharova, who works for Sergei Lavrov. And I like to watch, if there are important events going on, there are things I like to watch. Well, I think it was Thursday night, around the time of my show, I might even have reported on it a tiny little bit, but I think the news was just coming out. There was a allegation by the Polish that the Russians were sending drones into Poland, and it's been the talk of the weekend, and that is it's quite interesting to me. I like that, but that's only I only watched the appearance of the ambassador to the UN, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And then I watched another one, and this one got me on a roll. And I did some research, and I'm going to present some pretty long play stuff and some a pretty good analysis of what we have for something that is another Ukraine, okay? Kosovo was the first Ukraine, well, in Europe. Not really, but there's more than that. But I chose to analyze three, starting with Kosovo and then Ukraine. And we're going to go into a little bit about the Maidan and how that occurred. And then we're going to go into the one that Sergei Lavrov talked about, which is Bosnia. And, oh, my God, I knew, but I didn't know. I spent some time researching it because if you don't know, you need to know. We Americans are being lied to's not it. We're not being told anything. And so when I listened to this thing from Sergei Lavrov and this meeting with the president of we'll get into that too. That's an interesting tale. But did you know there's a king? There's literally a king in Bosnia, and he's an appointed king. He ain't even a resident of Bosnia. This is nonsense, but we'll get to it. And I knew, but I didn't know, So I did some digging, and I'm going to tell you some of this and get into it. And what brought it up was me listening to another foreign leader speaking with a third foreign leader. And I was like, well, what in the hell? What are they talking about? That's not what I understand it to be. And I went and found out. But before I get to that, I want to talk to you about these drones because there's been a bit of escalation on top of that. So these drones that were allegedly fired into Poland by the Russians. Don't believe everything you hear because there's something else to this. And so I'm going to give to you, and it's only by the time I summarized his entire statement, it's only a one-page deal, so it's really not that long. And I'll go through it and I'll read it to you. But if you don't understand or you don't recall, what happened on, I believe it was Thursday, right around the time of my show, is when I first found out about it, or a little earlier in the day. And I talked about it, and because I was surprised. And Russia didn't deny, but they didn't come out and say that was ours. There were some comments. It's like, wait a minute, you can't say we're bombing Poland. There was some of that, and some mixed reactions between people, but not a flat-out denial, and there wasn't a flat-out accusation, but except by, of course, the geniuses of the the EU, like Kaja Kallas is one of them, and then the president of Poland jumped in a little bit later, and now they've already invoked Article 4, and then over the weekend there was an alleged bombing in Romania that Russia allegedly is shooting into Romania now. They're headed west, and so we're going to discuss that a little bit, but not too far, because the vast majority of the show is going to be talking about the king that's been appointed in Bosnia. But what I thought I would do would be to tell you about one of the guys. He's funny. Well, he's not funny, but when he's extremely blunt and direct, and I think he's a professional. He's definitely a professional diplomat. His name is Vasily Alexeyevich Nebenzia, and Vasily Alexeyevich has been he's the current Russian ambassador to the UN. He has been serving as the permanent representative of Russia since July of 2017. And diplomatically, he's an ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary, which I have no idea what that means, but that is his title. And he's received awards including the Medal for the Order of Merit to the Fatherland. So he's a decorated person. And he's representative at the United Nations Security Council, which is going to be discussed tonight in a little bit of detail on part number 2, but not with Nebenzia. The thing all we're going to do is read his statement, and part of his statement, or what he was saying in front of the UN over the weekend, and it gives you a little more information that we don't hear any of over here. And so sometimes you just got to listen to the horse's mouth. And here's the horse. He says his response to the UN when he was, accused of, a drone attack on Poland. He says, once again, we are dragged into discussing a so-called Russian drone attack on Poland. Let me state clearly, Polish authorities rush to blame Russia without presenting a shred of evidence, even while they themselves admit that some drones may have come from Ukrainian territory. What actually happened? According to Warsaw's own operations command, debris fell in the Lublin region. A roof was damaged. No one was killed. No warheads were found. Now, so if you're bombing without warheads, that's a problem. And that's true, too, because I went and I checked it out. There's no evidence of anything like that. Any military expert will tell you if a warhead weighing tens of kilograms had exploded, the devastation would have been massive. What we saw instead was localized wreckage, consistent with a drone falling from the sky, not an intentional strike. Now, I saw a couple of videos on this, and there's a bunch of Ukrainian arguments with people in Belarus and stuff like that are saying that the same photos that they're showing of this little house where the drone had landed basically on top of it has duct tape on the drone, like it was taped together. It was sent over with no warheads, and it was on a home that had allegedly been damaged in a severe windstorm several months ago. And the same photos were used then. And so I don't know there's all kinds of crap on the internet, and who knows. But I did, stories are coming from different places. And the same thing is going on with Romania right now. The fact is, just don't believe, you just better watch what you believe, is all I'm saying. But here's the words from Russia that are never reported over here. And I'm not saying I'm the only one, but I think I'm the only one that's going to give you the whole statement. He proceeds. The Russian armed forces that night carried out precision strikes on military-industrial sites inside Ukraine, factories for armored vehicles, aviation engines, and electronics. None of these targets were on Polish soil, and the drones we use had a maximum range of 700 kilometers. It is physically impossible for them to reach Polish airspace. Despite this, our Ministry of Defense offered to share information directly with Poland. We remain ready for professional dialogue, not megaphone diplomacy. Belarus, I remind you, acted responsibly, warned Poland of risks, cooperating transparently. This is how serious states behave. You know how many times I hear this instead of this from Russia, that they talk about, you guys are never serious. You never approach us through formal channels. You instantly start just slinging mud on social media and stuff, and they say that all the time. And I sort of agree with them because it's true. What about diplomatic channels? Do they even exist? He continues, what did we see instead? Hysterical outbursts from Brussels and European capitals. This is where he talks about Kaja Kallas. EU diplomat Kallas raced to accuse us, calling for more EU militarization. It all looks exactly like 2022 Przewod, when a Ukrainian missile killed 2 Polish citizens. At that time, and this happened too, by the way, just so you know, I went back, I remember it, and then I went back and looked at it too. At that time, Kyiv tried to pressure Warsaw to blame Russia. A year later, even President Duda admitted this openly. Kyiv deliberately sought to drag Poland, and by extension NATO, into the war. Who benefits from this theater? Not Poland, not Europe. Only the Kyiv regime, desperate to expand the conflict, I definitely agree, and the so-called European Party of War, eager for new arms contracts and larger budgets. Colleagues, look at the reality. Ukraine is collapsing. True. Official data shows more than 140,000 military desertion cases in this year alone. And that's reported by the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine. Since 2022, 266,000 men have deserted the army of Ukraine. Entire units are at half strength and called successful. Losses of 15 to 20,000 men per month outstrip any mobilization. Even Commander Syrskyi, the general controlling Ukraine's army or military, admits Russia holds a 3-1 advantage and even greater in key areas. In key areas, they're saying it is 6-1. He didn't say that, I say that. Faced with this, Zelensky invents provocation. He rejects direct talks proposed by President Putin, claiming he cannot travel. So Putin says, if you want to come to Moscow, come on. And then he said two things. First, I can't travel, I can't get there, but he still has plenty of time to go places looking for more money and more weapons. And the guy, I recorded another guy, listened to another audio of Alexei Arestovich, one of his former partners, and he said, he won't go there. He's telling everybody he would likely get arrested. And even Arestovich said that is nonsense. What is Putin gonna? Putin would never do that. And what's he gonna do? Invite him and arrest him? He's saying openly, and nobody inside of Russia or outside would trust anything he said ever again. So even his own people or his own sort of allies are saying he's full of crap. That's not what Nebenzia said, though. But he continues, claiming he could not travel. Yet, Zelensky crisscrosses Western capitals, begging for weapons. His aim is not peace, but personal survival in office. And he finishes, so let us be clear. What Poland and the EU call Russian aggression is nothing but lies and hysteria, recycled to cover Kiev's failures. The real danger to peace is Kiev's manipulation and the West's indulgence of it. Russia does not seek escalation. We are ready for dialogue with anyone genuinely interested in peace, but we will not accept fabricated accusations designed to prolong this tragic conflict. Thank you, Mr. President. And that was Vasily Nebenzia, and he's the permanent ambassador for Russia to the UN. And, he's well-spoken. I listen to him. He always sounds like he's, and I would too. I mean, he's always getting beat up in that room, and he's always sounding like he's pissed off. And he's very well spoken, and I like listening to him as well. He puts his thoughts across well, and I thought I would share them because nobody ever does in America. So that's all I wanted to say about the drones, and I was going to hold that for another night, but I thought it was important to put in, and I've got a little bit kind of rushed to get through my thought process tonight. So what happened on late last night, I was just, reading some Russian news, watching a few Russian videos on YouTube, and the Ministry of Defense one popped up in my feed. And this was an event, where is it? This was a joint press conference between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Viktorovich, and Republika Srpska President Milorad Dodik, which was held in Moscow also on September 9th. So the same day as these what do you call it? Drones allegedly hit Poland. And basically it was it was a long press conference. It was a good long press conference, like an hour and a half or something, and it went on for a while, and they talked for a bit, but it turned out to be a really big deal, and I'm glad that I watched it. And basically, they started out with things like they were talking about their bilateral relations. And, this pisses off the West to no end, that this Bosnian, Republic... I'll explain how Republika Srpska fits into Bosnia. It's it's difficult to follow the playing card, okay? So if you want to understand. But they talked about their relationship. They have cooperation in energy, culture, education, blah, blah, blah. 12,000 students from Republika Srpska study in Russia. They have major cultural projects, including the Russian-Serbian Church and Spiritual Center, stuff like that. And so then he got to talking about something called the Dayton Agreement. Remember that name? We'll get back to it in part. But it's the 30th anniversary of NATO's deliberate force bombing in 1995 and the Daytona Agreement, where NATO just unilaterally bombed Bosnia, right? And we were helping, right? Of course we're helping, but we bombed the crap out of them. And Russia, got this settlement, is one of the guarantors of this settlement, which was signed in Dayton, Ohio. And it's a guarantor of the Dayton Agreements, and Russia has reaffirmed its stance. Basically, what it did was take Bosnia-Herzegovina and divide it into 3 equal peoples. They're supposed to be 3 equal constituent, what do you call it? Not populations, but ethnicities, really. Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks. And 2 equal entities, right? So they're the peoples, and then the entities, they're 2 republics inside of Bosnia. There's the Republika Srpska, which the guy Dodik was there speaking to him, and the other one is the other half of the country is called the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And there's broad constitutional autonomy for each of these entities, but they're one country. And Lavrov and Dodik accused the West of undermining the Dayton Accords by pushing Bosnia toward a unitary, centralized state. And it's been going on now for 30 years, and it's caused the worst political crisis in 30 years. Now, pay attention, because in all truth, this really could be bigger than Ukraine. Less people. Well, less people probably, but this is a big deal. So the criticism of the High Representative. So get this. You ever watch Game of Thrones? And they have the High Sparrow, and they have all these fake things that you get when you get to watch TV. But I can't find my glasses because I wrote a few of them down because I was like, Jesus, sounds like we're playing Game of Thrones here. And so this guy is called this is a real title. This guy is called the High Representative, and he's Bosnia's current king, basically. And he's a king in all but name. Wait till I tell you what his power is. There's the UN always appoints people as things called the High Commissioner, the, like of refugees, of human rights, all these lofty bureaucratic stuff. The High Commissioner for Palestine in the 20s and 40s, it was British mandate, He was a colonial governor, basically appointed to trample all over the Indians. And, I'm sorry, that one was Palestine, but they did the same thing in India, and he's called the High Commissioner of India. High Sheriff, an English ceremonial title. Lord High Admiral, British Navy. Lord High Chancellor, Senior Legal Officer of England, a very pompous title. It almost sounds satirically. But look at all these. This is what I got to think of. As soon as I heard the word High Representative, I thought of Harry Potter. And if you pay attention to it, there's a lady, she's appointed as the High Inquisitor. She's appointed to bring order to the Hogwarts school and in Harry Potter. And she's really just an unelected tyrant. right? And there's, in Game of Thrones, this guy named the High Sparrow. Also Game of Thrones, the High Septon. Star Wars, we have the High Council, the Jedi Council. All these figures that get a handout decrees nobody gets to challenge. There's a video game, Dishonored, got other people. High Priest, Supreme Leader from Star Wars. This title just sounds so crap. So maybe we could call Schmidt, this guy Schmidt, Christian Schmidt, could be the High Inquisitor of Sarajevo. And he could punish anyone who questions him. Or maybe we'll call him the High Sparrow of the Balkans. He's unelected, definitely. Uneconomic and unelected again. This is unbelievable what they're doing. And so, I don't know. He isn't really a high representative, but he's high commissioner like the Brits had in Palestine, like they had in India. They can do whatever they want. The only difference is the outfit. And this guy is a king. I mean, no doubt. And he has the power of a king. He can do whatever he wants. He can remove Dodik. He's already tried to. And we'll get into that. Both speakers, both Lavrov and Dodik, say that Schmidt is an illegitimate appointee because he wasn't approved by the UN Security Council. So this Dayton Agreement gets enacted in 1995. And, we'll get to the history in just a second. So basically, he's accused of usurping authority and destabilizing Bosnia. He's a German proxy, and he was just appointed by people from Germany. They liken him to the word. I had to look it up because they said he was a Gauleiter, which is a German term from Nazi times, and he was like. The Gauleiters were third in line to the Reichsleiter, where Reichs was regional, and then there's the Führer, which was Hitler himself. So Hitler, these Reichsleiters, and then these Gauleiters, which are basically regional governors. Absolute power to do whatever they wanted. And so they liken him to that. The guy earns, Dodik says in his speech, that this guy earns 41,000 euro per month, tax-free. Tax-free. And he has imposed over 280 foreign-driven decisions, which is crazy, and they don't get it. They have zero self-determination. This is a bad story for the West. That's why we don't hear about what's really going on in there, and I think it's worthy of paying attention. And which is why when I listened and I was a little bit not shocked, but when I listened to the discussion between Lavrov and Dodik, I'm like, well, what are they talking about? Dodik's been around for a while. He's legitimate. What are they trying to say here? What is happening that I don't know the answer to? How can this be? And that I don't know anything about this. So I spent several hours digging into this and making sure that I understood it. And I'm still no expert on it. And somebody might call me on a small mistake or two, but nothing dramatic because I went pretty far into it to make sure that I understood it. I'm having some technical ear difficulties, but everything is just great. Okay, so let's talk about the Western role in these historic grievances, because this person is supposed to be appointed and agreed upon by the UN Security Council. Well, the UN Security Council has a couple of important things. Very important. They're called Russia and China. And guess what they have? Veto power. And you won't believe how we got around that. We just get around and appoint whoever we want and do whatever we want. And then I need to stay in order so that people understand this. And I hate to get ahead of myself. So Let's see. Germany is accused of fueling Yugoslavia's breakup in the 90s. NATO bombings are blamed for long-term health crises in that area. 5,000 children with cancer. Lavrov linked Bosnia's crisis to a broader pattern of Western-backed coups. Kosovo in 2008. Ukraine in 2014. And now Bosnia. The Russian position, Lavrov said, they are the presidency of the UN Security Council in October when it comes up. And what he said was that that they are going to use the presidency of the UN Security Council, and I bet you anything Lavrov will be the president of the UN Security Council. It'll be him, and Nebenzi will be sitting in the back seat. That'd be my bet, because this is a big deal. And he wants to press for the principles of this Dayton Agreement to be upheld. And remember, the Dayton Principles, in order to be upheld, required that anybody appointed to this position, which has been expanded dramatically, again, only by the West, that the person appointed had to be agreed upon by the Security Council, and they weren't. They have not been. Russia rejects accusations of their own bad influence in the Balkans, and they point to Western manipulations. Lavrov emphasized, well, we know they've manipulated Ukraine. You know, that's no secret anymore. We know they cocked up Kosovo back in 2008, and that was a scam. And wait till I tell you, I mean, you already know this, but remind you of these things, what we did there. But guess what he did? Lavrov emphasized Russia's vision of what? A multipolar world. And he contrasts Western failed dictatorial leadership with the rise of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, both of which I have talked about. And it's a recurring theme. We dictate, and the rest of the world doesn't like it. And it's not just Russia and Dodik. It's China. It's India. There's stories on that too. I probably won't get to them today because this is a pretty long topic. So the stance of Republika Srpska. Dodik stressed his own loyalty to Dayton, to the agreement. Opposition to territorial concessions, because guess what happened? They took their territory, which is the same thing they're saying Russia can't do in the Donbass region. And oh no, you can't take Crimea like that. But only the West can do that. Again, rules for thee, but not for me. It seems to be a common theme. He announced he warned Bosnia is under occupation by foreign judges and Schmidt's office. This high inquisitor type. And they dictate what's going to happen. They countermand laws. Dodik announced his own referendum in Republika Srpska, which is set for October 25, 2025. And they want to assert their self-determination. Now, how do you like that? They want to have a representation because, remember, this Bosnia has two legs to it. They have the Republika Srpska, and then they have Bosnia-Herzegovina. And he's going, we don't want to be part of this. We want to be a Republika Srpska, period. And we shouldn't be part of this thing that the West forced upon us and installed their own king, just like they did in Kosovo, just like they did in Ukraine. So they're talking about it again. He underlined Republika Srpska refusal to impose their own sanctions on Russia, despite the other side, this Bosniak Muslim pressure, which comes from Bosnia Herzegovina, the other side. So, U.S. politics and the expectations. Dodik contrasted Biden's hostile policies of sanctions and financial threats with Trump's non-interventionist statements. He's saying that Trump's pretty much stayed out of it so far. And he expressed hope that Trump's return would end Washington's failed state building in Bosnia. Lavrov and Dodik both accused Biden-era officials of weaponizing sanctions to cripple the Republika Srpska financially. Both criticized the EU lack of leadership, migrant crisis everywhere, energy dependence on the U.S., and in their own internal stability. Dodik positions Russia as a resurgent great power. He endorsed Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. That's going to piss off some people in NATO and the EU. He called it a legitimate self-defense and directly linked it to earlier Western policies like those against his own country in the Balkans. And when they closed, and this was a long thing, I was pretty glued to this, Lavrov's message, all actors in Bosnia have to honor Security Council obligations. This is the UN Security Council. They're trying to make the UN enforce. But who ignores the UN? We do. We twist it. And we create rules for others, but we never follow them ourselves. And we undermine ourselves. The Dayton risks, and that could be a renewed war in the Balkans. We could be going at this all over again. More pressure toward World War III. Dodik's message in the final, he said, Republika Srpska will resist Western occupation, and they're already occupied, through political struggle and his own referendum, and they are relying on Russia's backing. And they had both of them share a vision of a multipolar order where Western dominance is replaced by balanced cooperation. In short, what this press conference was a coordinated attack on Western involvement in Bosnia. They want to enforce the original agreement, this thing called the Dayton Agreement, and they want to signal deepening Moscow Banja Luka alignment. It also tied Bosnia's internal crisis into these other broader struggles because that's where they belong. We're doing the exact same thing. It's the exact same playbook, and it really it's irritating to me. I don't like it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go further into this because I wonder why none of this, I went and looked hard to find people talking about this on the West. I did, I wanted to find out if Rubio was saying things about it. Nothing serious or recent. But they are being discussed in diplomatic and policy circles, but not very urgently. They're talking about the U.S. Embassy is in Brazil. Okay, Marco Rubio said something. The threats to Bosnia's territorial integrity, Marco Rubio is worried about, which means ceding from the country. Western governments and institutions warn that actions by Milorad Dodik undermine Bosnia-Herzegovina's central authority, the Constitutional Court, and the High Representative. And Marco Rubio is concerned over separatist law that is adopted by Republika Srpska, which went to block or expel Bosnian state judicial authority from Republika Srpska. Those laws are being challenged in the court, which the Constitutional Court suspends him, as does this High Sparrow dude. He goes, he can't do it. It gets worse. The West holds that decisions of Bosnia's court, the Central Election Commission, and rulings by the High Representative, this guy's making rulings of his own, with his own input, are valid under the Dayton framework. Now, that's not what Russia and China say because they didn't, they had not approved it. And I'll show you how they did that here in a bit. Rubio, he's been fairly consistent, though. He wants to, they're considering various options in response to the crisis. What are we going to do? He's condemning Dodik, of course, as trying to undermine the appointed people. Now, Trump, on the other hand, has been pretty quiet. He hasn't said much. And so people think that he probably has a little bit different approach. I hope he does. And so Lavrov and Dodik both said, Trump's more of a hands-off guy. Bottom line is Trump's official stance isn't well defined. But they expect he'll be pretty wary about being drawn in too deeply unless he's pushed. Or dragged by these neocon types, right? That's what I'm afraid of. So what is the Dayton Agreement? Okay, here's the core elements of it. It ended the Bosnian War, which took place between 1992 and 1995, with a peace treaty negotiated in Dayton, Ohio. The formal document was signed in Paris in December of 95. There was a complex constitutional order created to preserve peace among the three main ethnic groups, which I told you before, Bosniak, Serbs, Croats. The features include the country has two separate republics, autonomous, right? And there's Republik of Srpska, which are Serbians, basically, and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which they have Bosnian and Croat areas, It has a weak central government, joint institutions, but many powers go to the entities themselves. So they already act on their own behalf in a light, or in a lot of respects. The office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council were international oversight bodies with powers to oversee civilian implementation of the agreement signed, called the Dayton Agreement. The High Representative, listen to these powers he has. He has the authority to, by himself, annul laws, dismiss officials, etc., and he was granted extra ones with zero. In Bonn, they met separately in Bonn, several Western things, added a separate addendum to him, gave him all kinds of extra powers, didn't consult China, didn't consult Russia. And so this Constitutional Court of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Central Election Commission, and other state-level judiciary institutions are part of the framework, and they're supposed to respect the rulings of these bodies. And there were supposed to be mechanisms of protecting ethnic groups. Over time, the Dayton architecture has crumbled, and it's criticized both inside and outside of Bosnia for being inefficient, enabling corruption. It has nationalistic obstruction and fails many of the goals it set. But many see it as the only formal framework that holds Bosnia together. Many in the West say that. So what about this referendum coming up October the 25th that Dodik says he's going to do? What is it about? It's proposed by the Srpska National Assembly, and they want to ask whether their citizens want, one, the decisions of this high representative, do they accept them or not? And everybody knows that they don't. He's no part of it. He's an outside, unelected foreigner. B, do they accept rulings of the Court of Bosnia-Herzegovina against Milorad Dodik? They've said, throw him out. He's got to go because they don't like him and these nationalist tendencies. U.S. wants him gone. Or the EC wants him gone. And whether they accept the decision of the Central Election Commission to strip Dodik of his presidential mandate. Essentially a popular no vote on these rulings and the removal of Dodik. That's what they're asked for. The date is October 25, 2025. And the RS Parliament already said it. The build-up to this, has in February 2025, Bosnia-Herzegovina sentenced Dodik to 1 year in prison, banned him from politics for 6 years because he ignored the authority of the High Sparrow. He ignored the authority of the High. He goes, you don't have this authority. You can't do it because you weren't properly appointed. In early August, an appeals court upheld that verdict, an appeals court on the other side in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And on August 6, 2025, the Central Election Commission revoked Dodik's mandate. But Dodik and the Republika Srpska Assembly reject those decisions as unconstitutional and passed their own resolution rejecting the court's verdict and the CEC decision, and forbade early presidential elections and scheduled the referendum. So this is a serious fight. And the legal and institutional obstacles. Many domestic and international actors consider this illegal. The Bosniak caucus is using a vital national interest procedure to try to block it. The Bosnian state central government in the other republic and the High Representative and many in the EU and UK have condemned the referendum. They've already decided no referendum. You can't do it. You're not allowed to self-determine. Right? Certainly because they already know the outcome is going to be against them. They argue that judicial and electoral decisions cannot be subject to popular vote, as it undermines the rule of law and the high sparrow, right? So this is nuts. The consequences, what is really at stake? If this referendum passes, which it will, Republika Srpska leadership will claim a popular mandate to reject the High Representative, ignore central judicial rulings, and refuse to recognize Dodik's own removal. This could escalate another constitutional crisis. But whether such an outcome legally forces change could be problematic, and likely that increases tension too, because, well, of course, you could go right back into war. You could be just like, which is why I was interested in finding out more about this anyway, because we aren't hearing anything about this. We're going to be involved in another one. I think when I was listening to Matt's show earlier, I think he said something about this as well, or maybe the Kosovo that he was talking about. Let's see here. So I wanted to give you a little bit more about this High Sparrow dude. The High Representative role in Bosnia is the strongest hybrid of international law and outright political intervention, theft of a country, basically, that's left over from the 90s. Here's how it works. The office was created by Annex 10 of the Dayton Peace Agreement in 1995. The purpose of this High Representative was to oversee implementation of Dayton while NATO forces oversaw the military side. He's supposed to act as a kind of final authority for interpreting civilian parts of Dayton. The appointment process, here's how it goes. There's something called the Peace Implementation Council. It's a group of 55 countries plus international organizations that back Dayton. They nominate the High Representative. The UN Security Council has to endorse this nomination formally. But in practice, it's proposed by EU countries, the so-called, Quint, which is US, UK, France, Germany, and Italy. And then this Peace Implementation Steering Board confirms. And finally, the UN Security Council resolution is, rubber stamps it. But here's the rub. Christian Schmidt from Germany, who's the current HR, was never endorsed by the Security Council. Russia and China objected. Western powers went ahead and appointed him anyway. That's why in Moscow and Banja Luka, everybody calls him an imposter. They didn't follow the rules, and they appointed him anyway. And how much power does he really have? Originally, all he was supposed to do in 1995 was to coordinate, monitor, and report what was going on. But in 1997, we screwed him again. At the conference in Bonn, Germany, the international powers gave the High Representative the so-called Bonn powers. Guess what he gets? the authority to impose law and constitutional amendments. Not propose, impose. He can write his own laws and constitutional amendments. He also got the power, outside of the Dayton Agreement, to dismiss elected officials, judges, and ministers, including this Dodik. And he got the ability to veto or annul decisions of local parliaments. So yes, the High Representative, or the High Sparrow, is an unelected foreign proconsul with the power to override Bosnia's own sovereignty. In practice, he is just like the colonial governor that were appointed long ago. India, everywhere that the British ruled. And so there they go. The term and the length of appointment, there's none that lists everybody who has been. Who the average, they stay for 3 to 5 years. And this Christian Schmidt's been in place since 2021. So why is this so controversial? And why did it get me all jazzed up, right? From Serb and Croats, the High Representative is an outsider that imposes not their will, not the will of the country, but the West's will. He is not accountable to one Bosnian voter, not one. And his power directly contradicts any idea of sovereignty. You want to say that they are, what do you call it? Democratic? Is that what we're going to say? This is a democracy, a European democracy? Many Western legal experts admit that the bond powers have no basis in the Dayton Agreement. They were an invention of the international community to attempt to enforce order. Russia, China, and many Balkan voices argue the role is colonial and outdated, and after 30 years, it's time to abolish it. That's why Lavrov said he's going to talk about it when it comes up. So, I mean, geez, we know what Dayton says. We know what the bond powers added, and now basically it's a king, right? This is completely political. Okay, so the bottom line is Dayton created a mediator. Dayton didn't create a ruler, a king, but Bonn gave him all these extra powers and turned him into a king. So today, the High Representative really is like Game of Thrones. He's an unelected foreigner. He's not even from there, with powers no Bosnian citizen can check, and his legitimacy depends entirely upon Western political will. No law, nothing. He wasn't even appointed by law. So, I mean, why isn't the Western media discussing this? Well, I'll tell you. Yeah, Sam, why aren't they talking about this? Well, here's your answer. Friends and neighbors, Western ownership of this institution. I mean, you'll never see this on CNN, BBC, any major European paper. Nobody will question this. Why? Because we own this. This is us. And it's so obvious, too. The crap that we've done in there, nobody can deny it. This High Representative is a creation of the West, and it is completely undemocratic, and it undermines the entire peace process that was established in Dayton. And it would look like their own confession. Marco Rubio can't confess that Bosnia is a protectorate and not a sovereign state. Maybe Donald Trump can, and I'm very curious to see if that's the case. The narrative control. How are you going to control the narrative if we say this? If the Western media frames Bosnia as at risk of Serbian separatism, this is what we're saying right now. Serbia might want to get out. Yep, they really do. But the High Representative is always, under this narrative, he's presented as a guardian of peace and order, making $48,000 a month, by the way. But he's never, ever, ever presented as an unelected foreign overlord, which is exactly what he is. And what do they paint Dodik as? A nationalist, What's wrong with being a nationalist? He's a nationalist strong man. So if they have a referendum, it'll be the exact same as they claim in Crimea, in any of the Donbass, in Zaporizhia, everywhere. The same old West. This is the Western playbook. This is what we're watching. Okay. So let's parallel this to Ukraine. If you admit, if the West admits that Bosnia is under external rule from somewhere else, it strengthens my argument and everybody else's who says this, that the West does the exact same thing everywhere else in the Balkans, in Kosovo, which we'll get to in a minute. It interferes with their narrative, and it overrides any sovereignty. The West, once again, is picking winners and nullifying elections or the voice of any people. This is not democracy. Western governments want to avoid Bosnia being discussed at all, and they sure as hell don't want it discussed in the same sentence or same Sam's show as Maidan in 2014 or Kosovo 2008, because it proves those two once again. And this one's happening right now. And there's also a fear of setting a precedent. If somehow people of right-thinking mind delegitimize the High Sparrow, the High Representative, every other Western intervention model, let's talk about just a few of them. Kosovo's protectorate, which still exists, Iraq's CPA, Afghanistan's Board of Governors, even today's Ukraine oversight groups like that Anti-Corruption League start to look like colonialism, which is exactly what they are. So I said this could be bigger than Ukraine. Why did I say that? Well, in Ukraine, the West used NGOs, color revolution pressure, and International Monetary Fund loans. They kind of encouraged people to go. But in Bosnia, they wrote the system where a foreign appointee, he ain't even elected by them. He's a foreign appointee, and he gets to dictate law, fire elected leaders, and anything else he wants to. It is open colonialism dressed up like peacekeeping. This is you will do what we say, period. And the real kicker, Bosnia as an EU accession candidate. They want to get into the EU. But imagine being told here's where damn it. Imagine a country being told that they have to join Europe while they're still under the thumb of a king who doesn't answer to its voters. So the king tells them they have to join Europe. They don't decide that themselves. Isn't that nuts? That's crazy. I mean, seriously, forget about Ukraine. In Bosnia, the West didn't just meddle. It rules. This Christian Schmidt is the king. We need to put a crown on him. That's how it goes. So I thought it would be useful to go back into Kosovo, because Kosovo, this is still in place. This too is crap, right? And you want to know why Russians, Chinese, Indians, the rest of the world don't trust us? Listen up. Follow along here. And I admit this stuff is not easy. There's not going to be a test later, or anything like that. But it's good to at least have an understanding of some of these things. Or a basic understanding. And it took me, 4 or 5 hours to get the understanding that I do have, and lots of cross-referencing and going back to find other stuff. So let's go back to Kosovo. We're going to look at the three. We already looked at the Bosnia deal that's coming up now. which I think we should pay attention to. We know quite a bit about Ukraine because I talk about it all the time, but we'll go over Maidan in a little bit here as well, nothing too detailed. But Kosovo, I want to tell you about, okay? Here's how, and this is the prototype, the American prototype for a coup, for regime change. You know, this is what we do. This is our international interference, which, frankly, most of us, including me, by the way, and I like this stuff, you know, and I still, you know, who has time for it? Seriously. And so we let yahoos run the place, and what do you call it? Globalists take another country down, whatever path they wish to, and you know, they just take it all. You know, and install their own NGOs, install Hunter Biden to run, you know, countries or companies in these countries. You know, all of their buddies get to dictate. The military goes over there, but they don't have any authority. They just have to do what they're told. They have authority, but only authority to do what they're told at the direction of somebody else. You know, in NATO, same way. And I came across several of these. I wanted to do, in fact, until I started reading this yesterday, I had another one prepped to do a deep dive into, and I'm going to try to squeeze it into tomorrow night's hour and a half show, or maybe I'll wait till Wednesday, because the best show in radio, or best day in radio, you know, radio land, and do that day. And plus, these are things really. People need to know how wrong we have been. When are we going to change our approach and quit trying to take over the world and work with the world? You know, I've said this quite a few times. I would just love Donald Trump. I think he could do it. I think he could say, you know what, we're not playing this anymore. You run your country, I'll run mine. And he can say what Jai Shankar says in India, what Modi says in India. Look, you run your country as you see fit and what works for your people, for your culture, for the type of people you have. Quit trying to dictate what we will do in our country. We know what's best for our country. What is wrong with that approach? Seriously, what's wrong with that approach? If for example, Russia, India, China, and the U.S. all got together and didn't try to tell each other what to do, but instead say, why don't we tell our own countries what we're going to do? Focus on growth economically, spiritually, family, creating better places for you know, other people, assisting other countries, but let those other countries be sovereign. Why do you think everybody's, again, I'm right back to multipolarity. They're tired of dominant and being told what to do by kings appointed by Europe and America. They're sick to death of it. Frankly, I wish I was paying better attention during Kosovo. You know, I'm not one of those guys to march. Here's my voice. I'll give you my voice. And I'm happy to learn if you disagree with me. You can call and tell me how wrong I am. And perhaps I'll listen, especially if you know more than me. I like to listen to people that know more than me. I like that. I want them to teach me things. But most of the time, I can't believe all the crap. That's what I expect from the news. I expect them to tell me things that aren't twisted to make me think a certain way. And if you still believe you're not being twisted, I'm not trying to twist you, but I don't have anybody twisting me to twist you. But everybody, you know, all the major ones do. I know you know all that crap. I'm gonna get back to this, or I'll never get through. We got one more hour. We're halfway through, in fact, this deep dive. And I want to remind you that I am here in the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. If you are interested, you can email me while I'm on the air here, and I'm trying to get used to looking at it live at damradio.com. You can phone in at 573-746-8020. I might take it if it's a brief call. And you can also send me personal emails at samuelt@internationalflavor.com. All of my former prior programs are also at internationalflavor.com, and I would love you to listen to them. It's good stuff. And some of the topics, especially the deep dives, if you go into the Sunday deep dives, I try to come up with some pretty good stuff. So let's talk about Kosovo. And everybody's heard the name. Everybody knows, a little bit about it. But I don't think you understand. Or I know I didn't, and so that I did, but I didn't. We've forgotten about this. We aren't paying attention. The new, I'm like that. I'm like those dogs in that movie Up, the cartoon movie Up, where they talk and they're, well, no, we need to do this. We need to squirrel. They turn their heads and look for a squirrel. I'm like that guy sometimes. I get distracted a little bit. So let's and you know what? We need to pay better attention to this because our country has taken us down a path that could lead to freaking war. And so it's important to at least consider these things. Let's talk about how this started in Kosovo. In the 1990s, NATO started bombing Serbia. Humanitarian intervention was their slogan, but the reality was that air war was started and it bypassed the UN Security Council completely. The U.S. started bombing the crap out of Serbia. They didn't like what was going on in Serbia. So what? We all jump in and start bombing. But who said they could? Not the UN Security Council. And so they had this agreement after they watched this go on for 3 years, this Dayton Agreement in 1995. Bosnia was turned into what they call a Western Protectorate. So basically what that means, the next test tube for us to do whatever we want. After NATO's 1999 bombing campaign, Kosovo was placed under UNMIC, United Nations Mission in Kosovo. But in practice, and this is still true today, NATO and Western diplomats call the shots. How about that? You don't have a free country. We're in charge. That's still going on today. Local Serb structures were completely hollowed out. Western-trained Albanian political elites were empowered. They were put in charge of them. And then they played a trick. And this trick is good. And follow this because we keep on doing it. And I hope you understand how and why. And just watch for it. You'll see it again. So it's called the independence trick. In 2008, Kosovo's Albanian leaders unilaterally, remember they were appointed by us, and they unilaterally declared their own independence, even though there was a UN resolution that explicitly recognized Serbia's sovereignty, right? No referendum. They don't even have to have a referendum. There's nothing. You don't have to have a vote. You don't have to do anything. Just these Albanian leaders that were appointed by the West to go, guess what? We are independent. No referendum, no agreement with Belgrade, no consensus in the UN. But guess what happened? Immediately, Washington and Brussels recognized them as independent. They did it and we recognized, okay? Something we'll never do in the Donbass regions. But how do you gain legitimacy? Is Crimea ever? I saw a map today of Ukraine for sale somewhere, and it still shows Crimea as Ukrainian. Why? Because the U.S. won't recognize it. Nobody will recognize it. And they won't recognize any of these other countries or any of the other regions that have declared their own independence by referendum. Oh, geez, we don't recognize that. It's illegitimate. Why? Because you disagree with it. And that's really the only reason you disagree with it. You're influenced by those Russians, those Russians influence you. Yeah, but what about Kosovo? What about Bosnia? What about Maidan? What about Afghanistan, Iraq? Let's keep on going, What's going on in Syria, Nonsense. So in 2008, these guys just declare their independence, and then the U.S. says, yep, it matters. But why does this matter? Because once again, it breaks all principles of international law. What is Ukraine always complaining about? Borders are sacred. Our territorial integrity. What do you hear all the time? Territorial integrity, unless all parties agree. But no, not if you're in the West. It says if the West likes you, they let you secede. If Russia backs you, secession is illegal. Crimea, 2014. Donbass, and the other republics other regions in Ukraine that want to get out. Republika Srpska today. They say they want out. They want to have a referendum. We've already rejected it. So back in Kosovo, a permanent NATO outpost was installed in the Balkans, a black hole of corruption, drug trafficking, mafia politics, but it's very strategically useful because guess what it did? Got rid of all Serbian and Russian influence, and it stays that way today. It's got a Western group of people, kings. We appointed our own. The only one that's really a king is the guy that they have in Republika Srpska, Bosnia-Herzegovina. But he's over this Republika Srpska too. The king can't sue the king. You can't call the king wrong. Sam, what are you doing? How can you do this? So let's throw some parallels if you don't understand Maidan and how we did the exact same thing in Ukraine, following the exact same playbook. Get this. Here's the setup, right? Viktor Yanukovych, he's the elected president of Ukraine. He's elected. And he was not a Moscow puppet. But what he wanted and talked about was neutrality. He wanted trade with both Europe and with Russia. He didn't want that. He wanted to balance EU trade with Russian ties, Russian free gas, Russian low-cost everything, and not be, he wasn't necessarily going to the European Union. They weren't there yet. He hadn't decided that yet. And so he wanted more of a balance. The West can't have that. So Brussels and Washington cannot accept neutrality. A buffer zone is not enough. We have to drag Ukraine westward. So what did they do? Tons of NGOs, tons of U.S. Agency for International Development, Western media, and American diplomats. Victoria Nuland had a famous phone calls talking about what she was going to do. She was going to help appoint the next leader. She had them, right? And they just basically poured gasoline into a already bubbling street protests in 2013. And this protest turned into a coup. So the Maidan Square, and again, if you haven't watched a video by Oliver Stone, which everybody says, don't watch that, you need to watch it. That's the one you need to watch. The ones that say don't watch, definitely watch them. Even just to get a different point of view. I don't care if you end up believing it or not. Very well done. And I don't think it's crap. Watch it. It's called Ukraine on Fire or something like that. If I can recall, you can find it on YouTube. And so there were protesters that, guess what? We armed violent groups that were allowed to, far right people like Ukraine's right sector, these Nazi and the SS symbol wearing people that are killing ethnic Russians or just offing people, because they disagree with them. In February of 2014, there was a negotiated deal before Maidan, February 2014. A negotiated deal was signed between Yanukovych and the opposition. Guess who else signed it? Germany, France, and Poland. But within 24 hours, the West tore it up, said, nope, that's not effective. And armed groups, armed by the West, stormed government buildings and Yanukovych fled. He ran to Russia. Crazy. And what happened? We, Victoria Nuland, installed a new, openly pro-Western government with zero regard for any constitutional process. And immediately, Ukraine's new leadership started talking NATO, severing any trade with Russia, writing language laws against Russian speakers. It's Kosovo all over again, only much larger. And it was scaled upward to remove anything neutral or pro-Russian. Any leader, any party member, any Verkhovna Rada member were gotten rid of. And they installed a compliant regime, and then they can call it democracy. Why does this matter? Why? Because Russia saw it as a violation of their red line. No NATO on its border. The Slavic Orthodox Church was being dragged into an anti-Russian project. The Crimea voted overwhelmingly, that Russia stole from Ukraine. They voted overwhelmingly, something like 88% or something, to rejoin Russia. And the West started yelling, illegal. But in Kosovo, there was never a referendum at all. And they had just had in Maidan an uprising, no referendum, nothing to get rid, no elections, no democracy, no nothing. Just the West going, so we recognize this new leader, period. We recognize a new leader. Why? Because we installed him. Of course we recognize him. This is our playbook everywhere we go. And it's always anti-Russia, always anti-China, throw in India probably now. And with any luck at all, Donald Trump is not this way. I'm not so positive about that. Listen to what Rubio said, because I don't know that Rubio would say that without the old Trumpsters say so. I don't think so. But we'll see what happens come the 25th. Because I think Trumpster, unfortunately, is finding out that he can't just... I think he can, but I'm thinking that he can't do just what he wants. I don't know. The Donbass war got ignited right after this because locals refused to recognize the coup, the takeover government. They didn't do a referendum to get out like Crimea, but they said, we don't recognize you. Remember, they had agreements, Minsk I and Minsk II, that said your governors, like these governors that we were talking about earlier, your governors don't have to be appointed by Kiev. You can elect them and have some sort of autonomy on your own, that they aren't necessarily under us. In Minsk I and II, we're both supposed to do that, but those were just BS agreements signed for BS reasons. So Maidan became a textbook for how the West runs regime change. Use protests to cover. You pay people to protest. George Soros was very involved in this. You empower radicals. You bless the overthrow, recognize the new government, recognize the new territory if you agree, and sanction anybody who objects. You're sanctioned. That's it. And that was actually my topic. I wanted to go into the history of sanctions. It's an eye-opener, seriously. I think I can get that done in an hour and a half. This is nonsense. This is the constant narrative from any realistic person's perspective, anybody, in honesty. If you look at this honesty, the pattern is clear. Any leader who tries to stay neutral, and certainly if he's pro-Russia, he's got to be removed. Serbia had Milosevic in the 90s when the Soviet Union was collapsing. They were very pro staying with Russia, trade with Russia, everything with Russia. He had to go. Yanukovych in Ukraine, Dodik in Republika Srpska today. Any leader that was in the Donbass, and anybody, what are they doing against people that are saying anything pro-Russia today? You're going on a kill list. There was a story in the paper today that said there are children now on this, what's the name of the list? Mirotvorets list. And Mirotvorets, I told you about that. And when Scott Ritter when I did my interview with him that a month ago or so, maybe a little longer, he said that he was on the Mirotvorets list and was talking about it. It's basically a kill list. People like Tucker Carlson. Charlie Kirk was on I played that piece for you the other day, that he was on the kill list. And it's now they're putting kids on the kill list. Why? Because their parents are saying things they're people who object. And their kids go on. We're putting generations on this list. And this is nonsense. It's crazy. No neutrality is allowed. No different approach is allowed. It's all got to be Western dominance, Western globalist rhetoric, all dollar, all NATO, nothing Russia. And there's, what good has anyone said about Russia? They are trying to, there was another article I read today that in several Western, let's call them European places, they're banning Russian as well. Cab drivers, stuff like that, can't speak Russian. They're trying to make it a law that you can't speak it. What are you going to do in America? I mean, I remember it, but it was more facetious than anything because, I'm not sure we could put anything out there. But I remember when people would go, "Don't speak Mexican." Speak English, and they're yelling at him and stuff like that. Nonsense. And you can't dictate what other people say, what language they use. You can't. You might be able to say our national language is X and we wish you to assimilate. I'm all for that. But don't tell me that in my own home I can't speak Russian if I choose to. Or if I'm in a cab and I'm a cab driver and I'm more comfortable in Russian than in English, let's say the phone rings. You ever been in a cab or an Uber and the phone rings for the guy driving the car and he starts speaking to somebody in a foreign language? Happens all the time. And, whether it's Indian, whether, and they're speaking Punjab or whether they're speaking Chinese or whatever, Eastern European, they speak in another language. Well, they're trying to make it a law that says you can't do that. I offended all those people in my tales that I was telling you about my Uber rides in Lithuania. They're nuts about it over there. They're crazy. And it's just nuts. Where are we going in this world? This complete inability to accept the differences in other people. I don't know. Crazy stuff. But the toolkit in our takeovers, it's always Media demonization. Media comes out and says everybody's authoritarian. Dodik's an authoritarian and he's a nationalist strongman. And they say the opposite of anybody the West throws over. This king, for example. The king, oh, no, he's a mediator. He's the good guy. He's the good guy. Everybody, oh, geez, those Russians, they're bad guys. You know, you ever see them on TV? There's never anybody. It's just a band. They're bandits. Every one of them's a bandit, right? Has to be. That's what's on TV. That's what's in every movie from Hollywood. You ever see a Russian as the good guy? Ever? They just don't exist. Then, what else do we do? What else is in our toolkit? Media demonization. Sanctions on family and inner circle of anybody that objects. You empower and give huge money to NGOs to fund private, let's say, podcasters all over Ukraine. We're getting butt tons of money from where? The United States to broadcast this stuff all over. They wouldn't give me a nickel, I'll tell you that, because I won't be bought, and just say whatever. That's probably not true. If somebody want to buy me, call, give me some money, and we'll talk. We'll see. If protests don't topple the leader you're trying to get rid of after you've paid for them and media got them into a frenzy and had George Soros send over millions, you then create a legal crisis through courts that you control and international overseers that you appoint. Then bomb them until they accept your international overseers. Make them create an agreement that you never intend to honor. Dayton, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, any of them, just pick them. Send 50 lawyers afterward to argue about particular terms and say, we don't recognize the spirit of the treaty. You got to have the words of every single thing. Even though we said in other memorandums of understanding we would do this, that don't count. We didn't put it in the treaty. Tricked you. We tricked you. That was only in the memorandum. It didn't end up in the final language. That's on you, not us. So nobody trusts us because you can't deal with them. If that still fails, you threaten financial collapse. We're going to sanction you, boy. You better use our stuff. Those aren't working, by the way. And the justification is always these high-minded slogans like European values. What are European values? What is it? Transgender? Rainbow coalition? We tell you what to do so you don't have to think, that kind of thing. They say we're protecting minorities and guaranteeing human rights, but they don't have any protections in their own countries and no human rights. But the underlying rule is even more simple. No country on Russia's border is allowed to be neutral. You got to be anti-Russia. How come the West can't admit this? Why? Why is it that they can't admit it? If the Western media ever called the high representative, this Christian Schmidt guy, if they ever called him a king, or if they ever admitted that Maidan was a coup, or if they ever said that Kosovo broke international law, everything we have done as a U.S. post-Cold World order looks like one long colonial project, doesn't it? Bosnia, a protectorate with a foreign king. Kosovo, a NATO colony. That's what it is. And Ukraine, our beloved Ukraine project. Project Ukraine is a regime change experiment. Instead, we repeat the same line over and over and over. Russia interferes. Russia destabilizes. Russia provides disinformation. Russia threatens democracy. That's what we say. The reality is the West has been interfering so aggressively that even being neutral toward Russia is regarded as treason. You're not allowed to do it. You have to be removed. You're getting thrown in prison. Dodik is going, he's going to go to, and he can't be elected for 6 years. They're doing the same thing all over Europe. It's pretty sad when you got to go for your bastion of hope to Xi Jinping, Modi, and Vladimir Putin. We're supposed to be the good guys. We are not. We just aren't. So Bosnia today looks like Maidan before it exploded. But they already have a king sitting on the throne. They don't have to wait for Victoria Nuland to appoint one. I mean, they don't, because they're already there. We've done it, right? Oh, crazy stuff. So these regulations from Kosovo, the International Civil Administration and the security presence, the so-called KFOR, which came up after NATO bombing, it reaffirms the sovereignty of the country and its own territorial integrity, and says substantial autonomy for Kosovo. What does this translate to? Autonomy inside of Serbia, but no independence. Nothing. Who runs Kosovo really? The UN Secretary General Special Representative, SRSG, Special Representative Secretary General, heads this United Nations mission in Kosovo. And he too is kind of a prototype king. And he can issue his own regulations, run the courts and the police, and he's been doing it ever since. That's what's happening. Isn't that crazy? The unilateral declaration of independence that happened in 2008, Kosovo's assembly declared independence unilaterally, zero referendum, zero United Nations Security Council. It contradicted their own sovereignty language, which was appointed in the UN. Serbia told the council it was illegal and asked them to nullify it. But what did they do? They got the International Court of Justice to say, no, it's okay. Oh, and then the West goes, well, we got a ruling. But Russia and China have been screaming about it forever. And India has too, for that matter, but less vocally, because they didn't guarantee it. They aren't on the Security Council, which is a big complaint that they have as the largest population on the planet. And instead, who's on there? Is tiny little countries in Europe. But Russia immediately condemned this as a flagrant violation in Kosovo and a precedent that shreds the Security Council's authority, but nobody pays any attention. But nothing. They just completely ignore it. You only ignore it if if it's coming from China or Russia, which is why, where are they going, friends and neighbors? Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I talked about last Sunday, the RIC, Russia, India, China group that leads that, just like the same group leads BRICS. And Jai Shankar says things like, look, it's multipolarity. That's what the world's about right now. Run your own country, work well with others, get along with others, just like your mom told you. But not on a world level. The U.S. just can't do it. We can't do it. This resolution that ended Kosovo, or started it, it promised autonomy in Serbia, and the West delivered independence without the council. The council didn't get a vote. That's why Russia, just like the other times, just like in Ukraine, just like just like now, that when they're talking about Republika Srpska, and then they kept the power inside, the West kept the power inside of Kosovo. Isn't that crazy? 1244 reaffirms integrity. But we twist it. Russia says, flagrant violation. Recognize it and you normalize imposed solutions to ethnic conflict. China says unilateral action compromises the Security Council. But in the West, we always bypass the UN Security Council if Russia and China object. Always install a crown, whether that's United Nations mission in Kosovo, whether it's this High Sparrow guy, Schmidt, and then you get the locals to legislate until you agree, until what you're asking for, until their new law matches what you are seeking. Then you declare facts, seek legal cover letter through the ICJ, which you also control, and then you control the narrative the rest of the time. Independence is always about what you want. Human rights, nationalism. Geez, you can't have that nationalism. We want nationalism in the United States. Why can't they have nationalism where they are? Nonsense. Dictatorial. Colonialist. And there's plenty of people still talking about it inside of Kosovo. Okay? Plenty of them. Kosovo, for example. It's an independent Kosovo-Serbian portal in English. Recent items show community talking about pushback and daily friction, police action, UN beating up on people, these peacekeepers, corruption everywhere. It was hard not to get stuck in there, and keep on reading and trucking. It's very interesting. There's a thing called Radio Contact Plus. They do field reporting. There's a bunch of stuff, and nothing has changed since 1999. Nothing. It's still basically controlled by us. Kosovo has a crown. In Kosovo, the West doesn't call the shots. They even kept the whistle. They run everything in there. It's just beyond belief to me that we're still here with the U.S. running absolutely everything. Now, you got to keep your acronyms. There's so many acronyms that come out. It's kind of hard to keep track. So take your time when you get there. I want to bring this back to the king who's right now on the throne again, and Lavrov, and why this, and Lavrov and Dodik, and why this is important. Remember, their meeting, or Russia's takeover, if you will, presidency of the UN Security Council is coming up in October. They're having that UN Security Council meeting like they do every year. And I'm 90% certain that Lavrov will be the one doing it. And he's announcing now, a month in advance, and before these referendums take place. And people will ignore him. They always do. They did last year. And they ignore him. In Bosnia, there's already a king on the throne. So this Dayton thing is going to be a big, with this agreement that came out in 2005, the bond that the crown, the crown was forged because it wasn't supposed to be. The bargain was just for a mediator, for a negotiator. 2 years later, unilaterally, the crown was created. Remember, imposing laws, dismissing officials. And then the reign of the king, this current king, Christian Schmidt, he was appointed but not endorsed, not properly appointed. And but if you're the U.S. and the EU, you can declare him to be in office and pay him $50,000 a month anyway. Right? And what has Schmidt done himself? He struck down Republika Srpska laws enacted. He declared himself, all by himself, no court, he declared Dodik was guilty of criminal offenses because he refused the orders of the king. Then he threatened prison for any other official who disobeyed him. So, in Bosnia, one unelected German has the authority to crown and decrown the president. What Russia and China? Russia refuses to recognize Schmidt. They call him an imposter. They insist this office of the High Representative must be closed. They assert totally, and they're right, that the United Nations Security Council has the sole authority to approve the High Representative under this Dayton Agreement. China echoes Russia. Absolutely. No legitimacy without the UN approval, UN Security Council approval. And both of them argue that Bosnia is a sovereign country under the Dayton agreement, and that the High Representative is a Western cudgel to strip the Serbs of any rights. And so this Dodik, I suppose you could call him that's a patriot. You know, here's another guy getting ready to go to prison, right? He's been ordered a year in prison, and 6 years he can't run for office, stripped of any title, anything he's done. The High Sparrow is basically turned over, and he refuses to recognize these decrees. That's Donald Trumpian, in my view. He was convicted for ignoring Schmidt. His crime is disobeying the king. That's it. That is it. The Central Election Committee annulled his election. He does. No, I'm sorry. Schmidt says you broke the law, and Schmidt's the king. So there you go. The RS Assembly is backing him, though. RS, Republika Srpska. Their assembly is they're backing him. They have this referendum for October 25th. Remember that date. Voters will say whether they recognize Schmidt, the court, or Dodik. It's likely that no is Dodik's removal. I mean, all three of those are likely no. That the Republika Srpska, the leadership, this Dodik and the assembly, will claim a popular mandate against the king, against King Schmidt. And Western diplomats, are already calling the referendum illegal. But according to the Republika Srpska, they see it as their only democratic answer to remove the king. So, once again, no neutrality is allowed. You certainly can't lean toward Russia. And obviously, Dodik leans Russia because he was meeting with Lavrov, right? And they refused to sanction Russia. They haven't done that. So they have to be punished. And how do you punish them? Schmidt. He's unelected, foreign. What's the legal fig leaf, though? West says, well, wait. We gave him powers in Bonn. That makes it legal. But Russia says Dayton didn't allow that in the agreement. So does China. So do I. And so, instead of storming the squares in Maidan or bombing campaign headquarters in Kosovo like we did last time, Bosnia coup comes just straight up royal decree. The royal decree, the king said, you can't do that. And so why is it that Bosnia today equals Ukraine 2014? Like I say. This is what I say. In Ukraine, the West used a street coup to get rid of a neutral leader. You had to get rid of him. Yanukovych, we can't have him. He's not trying to drag Ukraine into the EU, and he's not trying to drag him into NATO. And we've already started buying, all the land. We've already given that land to BlackRock, and we've already told them they could have it, and they're waiting to come in and buy that land. And we have Joe Biden and his son ready to get rich. We can't have that. He can't have a neutral leader. So you sign an agreement one day, tear it up the next, have a coup, replace him, and go, that's a good person. That's Ukraine. And here it is. And we're going to do the exact same thing in Bosnia. Exact same thing. The West is going to use a court coup. We already said he's guilty of not following the High Sparrow. And then we've already said he's got to go to prison for a year because he won't obey our orders. And in both cases, the enemy is not the dictatorship. It's not these people. It's not the fact that Ukraine or Bosnia wants to have elections or doesn't. It's that these particular leaders, Yanukovych and Dodik, are neutral toward Russia. You cannot be neutral toward Russia. You have to hate them. You have to want to destroy them. You can't call them the good guys. They're all mafia drug dealers, just like in American movies. They're all killers and bad people, according to Hollywood and according to the U.S. government. And all of, NATO and the Security Council. You ever hear anything good said about them? Ever? Lots of acronyms in that one too, but I won't go through them. It was kind of interesting to go through this. I would say this: the crown always comes with recognition. You got to recognize this crown. And you have to recognize, the West has to recognize, this is how they win. Every time. This is how they do it. We recognize it, therefore it is. Okay? We don't recognize it, that means illegitimate. And somehow our voice is the most powerful. Why? Because historically we have the deep state, we have globalism. So if we install the king, like in Kosovo, the installed king was the UN mission in Kosovo. In Ukraine, we installed the Maidan Western envoys and IMF overseers to make sure that the new leadership post-Yanukovych did what we wanted them to do. We had Joe Biden over there giving money. We installed this new government, and they had to be anti-Russia. They didn't necessarily have to be pro-U.S., but that was very helpful too, because that's how they shared in the money that they gave to Joe Biden and his son. And in Bosnia, Schmidt, an unelected German, rules by force and rules by decree, just like a king. That's the first part. You install the king. The second part 2 of our playbook, break neutrality. Like I said, any leader that refuses to sever ties, if Yanukovych was anti-Russia, they'd let him stay. That wouldn't have happened, no doubt. If Kosovo was anti-Russia, wouldn't have happened, no doubt. Bosnia, if Dodik is anti-Russia, he's not, but if they could somehow buy him, this wouldn't happen. He'd be legitimate, no doubt. And then what do? So you break their neutrality. You have to get rid of the ones who won't. You get rid of them. First the king, then the no. Get rid of neutrality, make everybody live with it. And the last one, you recognize. In Kosovo, unilaterally declared independence. West recognized it the next day, even though the UN resolution forbade that. They couldn't do it, but we did it anyway, because rules for thee, not for me. In Ukraine, Yanukovych was basically chased out, and the West recognized the coup, the new government. The next morning, immediately, we recognize it. Victoria Nuland helped appoint them. And then Bosnia today. Schmidt has already called Dodik's referendum illegitimate, and he's the High Sparrow. But if anybody defies him, the West will simply recognize the institution and officials who obey the king, and they will refuse recognition to those who don't, no matter what Lavrov says. So let's get back to the Lavrov conference with Dodik on May 9. Both of them, as I told you earlier, laid it out completely. Bosnia is ruled by an imposter king, a high sparrow who was imposed without the UN Security Council as required under the Dayton Agreement, and it undermines the very agreement that the West signed. Once again, we sign agreements we have no intention of following. Or somebody changes office and they'll say, well, geez, that guy's not around anymore. Sorry. And Russia has promised to raise this issue at the UN in October. Doubt it'll do him any good, but it chairs the council, so it at least gets to bring up the topics. And it's going to defend the principle that Dayton, the agreement, and not the king, defines Bosnia's sovereignty. And Dodik himself has said the referendum is the people's shield, a democratic answer to the king's rulings and decrees. Before a single ballot has been cast, Schmidt has declared the referendum illegitimate, as has Marco Rubio, as I told you earlier. Same part of the script. You can't vote against the king. If the referendum goes forward and voters reject Schmidt, the West will do what it always does, ignore the result, call it anti-Dayton agreement, and only recognize those who kneel to the crown. Kosovo, Maidan, Bosnia. 3 crowns of different types. Same kingdom. The throne is in Brussels and in Washington, not in Kosovo, Maidan, or Bosnia. Recognition is what they use, the scepter, to whoever the West anoints and blesses. They are legitimate. Anybody who defies them, Putin's a criminal. You're a criminal, right? You're a nationalist. You're a separatist. You're a name. We got to call you a name. But if you're anointed, you are blessed. You are sacred. What Lavrov said last week on Thursday, I think it was Thursday, whatever the 9th was, with Dodik, was pretty blunt. Destroy Dayton, crown your king. You invite not peace, but another Balkan war. That's sad, but true. That is very sad, but true. And that, my friends, is my thought on this. Bosnia doesn't really have a president anymore. It's got this high representative. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Sounds like a, Dungeons and Dragons character. He punishes people who he doesn't want. Oh. And that is a wrap of the story a few minutes early. There's a couple of things I wanted to also tell you about, if I can pull them up real quick. Let me see, because there have been some other occurrences, and quite a few of them, in fact, that have occurred. And I wanted to tell you also about my show for, I can't decide, and I think I'm going to do it on Wednesday, on this sanctions history. I've already, I thought about doing it tonight, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get this one done in an hour and a half. I thought I could get it done in 2 hours. Looks like I was right. But I may be able to get my my thoughts on these sanctions and the history of sanctions. Package number 19. Here's another package of sanctions. Package number 19 is coming up. And I want to talk about it again and in detail. Admittedly, you got to be interested in this stuff. But you should probably pay attention to it, because this is important. I found that article I was going to tell you about on the Ukrainians adding a 3-year-old to their kill list. A group of Russian children, the youngest of whom is 3 years old, has been targeted by the very controversial Mirotvorets website, which really means peacemaker. which publishes personal details of individuals it labels as the enemies of Ukraine. Some people call it the kill list. According to an entry added on September 13, a child born April of 2022 is accused of conscious violation of the state border and encroachment on sovereignty. On the same day, 5 other minors, aged 5, 9, 10, 12, and 16, were also blacklisted for similar offenses. Earlier this week, a 5-year-old and several 11-year-olds were added. Russia's envoy for humanitarian issues, Rodion Miroshnik, he's interesting to listen to. He's always angry, condemned the targeting of these children, accusing Kiev of sowing discord and hatred to incite hostility. And I liked what he said here. I wanted to make sure to read it. The Ukrainian Reich, they want to, instead of the Third Reich, it's the Ukrainian Reich, is declaring toddlers enemies of the state, he said. The radicals and Nazis who rule the ball in Ukraine today harass not only politicians or military personnel, but their children, their close or distant relatives, seeking to sow the seeds of hatred as deeply as possible into the shattered consciousness of Ukrainians. Wow. Launched in 2014, then it tells you about the list. I'm not going to read that to you. I listened to something I saw a debate, and it was pretty short. It was only, and it'd be fun to play it for you. And I may actually do that one time this week. It's certainly in my playlist, and I might play it. It's Henry Kissinger on a TV show, a 60-minute sort of program, with a college professor talking about NATO expansion with maps in the 90s. And I found it pretty enlightening. You know, I talk about that on a regular basis. And I found it enlightening that, especially because they somewhat agreed with some of the things that we were stating. Now, back in 2018 or so, there was an article, or several articles and several TV shows. I hope I don't have that year wrong, but I think he was still alive. And they were quoting him, and I think he was on another TV program, and I saw, but I don't remember the dates of it. I'll have to pull that together, because they said that he, at that time, was for Ukraine joining NATO, said it was part of it, but he was, I don't want to say against, but he questioned the necessity of doing it back in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed, and he outlined some of the things that are occurring today. So there you have it. Well, that's the end of that, my dear friends and neighbors. And now I'm going to give you what's upcoming this week if we go to our Damn Radio schedule and discuss what is coming up. Where are we? Monday, September the 15th, Shield Maidens of Missouri. JR's Really Big Shoe and me again at 9 p.m. Tuesday, September 16th, we have Really Big Shoe, Show Me History, and International Flavor. Wednesday, the biggest day in radio, we have Damn Swag, we have Jimmy Tebow, we have Gabby Hayes' show. It was fun to listen to last week. I'm going to listen to him again this week. That'll be fun. We had the Really Big Shoe We have Ike Skelton coming in, and then me again. And then Thursday, my last show of the week, and we have a really big shoe. And then rounding out the old Friday, we have Nadine at 9. We have really big shoe and Isle the Beholder with DJ Polly. Very entertaining. Well, it has been International Flavor here on damradio.com/live. I encourage you to join me each night at 9 p.m. and we can discuss matters of this nature. If you would like to listen to them on my podcast, you can find that at www.internationalflavor.com. All my prior podcasts are there. I appreciate you.